And yeah, so what we're going to be doing, we're just going to get started with this today. We're going to talk a little bit more about color functions and different types of values that you can use with colors. And we've already covered everything in this kind of shapes and functions lecture. We kind of did that while we were talking about this first project. So we're going to skip over this, but if that's a good place to kind of review a lot of the stuff that we've already talked about in class, if you want a little bit more of an in-depth review of the things that I went over when I was doing the demo. The shapes and functions is a good way to do that. A little bit of this stuff you don't need to know, like you don't really need to look at the HTML because we're using the P5 editor. And most of this stuff we've already kind of talked about. Some stuff we'll go over in more detail in later lessons. So we've also already talked about colors, but what I'm going to talk about today is different types of values. So that's the main thing we're going to talk about in class today. It's not a whole lot of content, but I just kind of want to go over this specifically. But before we do that, I am going to talk a little bit about the assignment. So let's go back to the schedule page. So the way the first little bit of the class is broken up, and I'll put a link to this in the voice message. So yeah, so we're going to work on this self-portrait for a few weeks, and part of the reason we do that is because I want to give you guys a chance to kind of work on one project for more than 1 week, because otherwise I think it feels like we're kind of like doing too many things. So we're going to be adding code each week, but the project itself doesn't necessarily have to change much. It could change if you're like, if you make your first self-portrait and then you have a different idea that you want to do next week, you can change it. That's fine. But I think for this first project, we're going to be learning next week. This week we're still going to just be working with shapes and colors. Next week we're going to be learning our first real programming concept, which is going to be it's a bit tricky because it's abstract and it can be hard to kind of figure out exactly how it works. So we're going to start with a simple drawing of a self-portrait, and then we're going to recreate it, but we're going to do it in a different way. And so we're not going to necessarily have to create a whole new self-portrait, but just kind of redraw the self-portrait we created. So it'll be a little bit similar to recreating the artwork, but it right now we're going to use code like we did to create the artwork to create an original self-portrait. So you're going to make something from scratch. And then next week you're going to use uh, similar code but slightly different to recreate that self-portrait in a more sort of programmatic type way. That probably doesn't make a lot of sense right now, but you'll see what I mean when we get into it next week. So anyway, we're going to start this week with a very simple self-portrait. I'm going to demo it a little bit when I get started with the colors today, and then I'll finish the rest of it on Wednesday. And then we'll have a lot of time Wednesday to work in class as well. Um, and then next week we're going to do variables, which is going to be kind of tricky, but we'll go over it, and we'll also do a little bit of a debugging exercise. And then the third week for this project, which is I guess week 4 in the class, we're going to make the self-portrait interactive. So we're just going to add a simple bit of interactivity to it. So we're just kind of adding things bit by bit so that we have time to understand everything. Um, so yeah, that's what we're going to be doing for the next few weeks. So there's 3 different assignments, but they're all kind of related and can be using the same basic premise, which is the self-portrait. Um, so yeah, any questions about that setup before we get started with a little demo? Okay, sweet. If there are questions, interrupt me at any point, and we can go over it. So yeah, I'm going to talk about some new color values today, but I'm also going to start making a self-portrait project. So I'm going to go over here to my color page, and there's a few examples in here. So a lot of the notes have these interactive examples, which we haven't really looked at yet. But the thing that's nice about these is that you can see what is happening in the code, but then you can also change the code. So if you were curious, like what would this look like if I changed the stroke to orange or something like that, you can click on the preview and it'll actually update. And then you can close the preview. So for the notes pages, that makes it a little bit easier to look at the code and understand what's going on. But a lot of the time when I'm explaining a concept, I'll probably be also using P5 in a separate window, just so I can do different things that we may want to do in the moment in class. But anyway, let me put this into the chat so you guys can open this up if you want to on your own computer. And then I'm going to go ahead and open up the P5 editor. So I'll go to editor.p5js.org, and I'm going to create a new project. So I'm just going to go in here and change this to self-portrait version 1. And I have a lot of these, so I'm going to put MMP 210 fall 2022 here. Okay, so as usual, if I'm starting a new project, I'm going to make a multi-line comment, which is just a / asterisk, and then whatever comment I want to write, and then another asterisk / which kind of blocks out my comment. So I can write whatever I want in here, and it will be ignored by my code. So I'm going to say this is my self-portrait version 1, and by Owen Roberts, and this one is on the 12th, 9/12/2022. Okay, and for now, I think I noticed this with a couple of people. Um, for right now, we still are not really going to be using this function, the draw function that usually comes up when you create a new P5 project. So if you're writing code in there, that's not a big deal. We are going to be using it. You'll see why in 2 weeks when we make the portrait interactive. But for now, we're still not really going to be using this. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this. I'm going to do everything inside of this like setup function. And just to keep things simple, I'll explain why more. I'll go into a lot of detail about what the difference is in a couple weeks once we kind of learn some of these basics. So for my self-portrait, we have our canvas, and I'm just going to draw a background so I can see the size of the canvas. So I'll do, let's do a black background. Okay, there's our black background. I'm going to actually change the color a bit because it's very similar to the background of my editor. So I'll do a gray background. Maybe that's going to be even more similar. No, it looks fine. And since I'm doing a portrait, you don't have to do this, but normally, like when you look at a portrait, like portrait mode on your phone or whatever, it's like taller than it is wide. So I'm just going to do that here as well, just for the heck of it. So I'm going to make the canvas a little taller. I'll do 400 by 600. Okay. And so as I'm starting to create my new self-portrait, I'm just gonna start with the basic shapes that I would want to create for a self-portrait. When you're working on your own project, you don't necessarily have to make something that looks like you. You could make something that's abstract that represents something that you like, or just a design that you think is cool, or something like that. The self-portrait is just kind of like a premise to get you started. And one thing that I do want to do is just make something that's unique to you. So I don't want to see like exactly the same thing that I'm doing, because I'm going to do something really boring and generic just to kind of show some of the basics. Um, so I want to start with a basic shape. I'm going to start with a rectangle, and I'm going to show you guys something that we maybe haven't done yet. So I'm going to start with a rectangle. I'm going to start by trying to put it in the middle of the canvas. Oh, you know what? I think we actually did do this, but I'm going to go over it again anyway. So I'm going to try to put my rectangle in the middle of the canvas. And so my canvas, remember when I create it, this is the width and this is the height. So we can tell 400 is the width of the canvas, how many pixels it is wide, and 600 is the height of the canvas. And that makes sense because our canvas is taller than it is wide. And so if I want to put the rectangle in the middle of the canvas, um, I would start by saying, okay, so what's half of 400? And that's 200. I could also just say 400 divided by 2 if I didn't want to like really, do the math in my head, but it's pretty easy just to say, so 400 divided by 2 is 200. And then what's half of 600 is 300. So I'm going to put 300 in here. So that's the XY. And then for the size of the rectangle, I might want to make it like even a little bit bigger than half. So maybe I'll do like 300 for the width and I'll do like 400 for the height. So it's actually a little bit bigger than half. And so it'll take up more of the area. But when I run this, my rectangle is like down here. And what I really want to do is have my rectangle. Oh, let me turn on my. Oh, wait, you won't be able to see that. So never mind. Uh-oh. Sorry, I hit the wrong button on my keyboard. There we go. Okay, so I have my like center here in the middle, but what I really want to do is have the whole rectangle centered. So I think I did actually show this last week, but remember I can change the style, the way that the rectangle is drawn by changing rect mode to center. And so now I get the rectangle in the center of the canvas. And so I can do that with both circles and rectangles. Like I can actually draw circles from the top left if I want to, but the default, for whatever reason, is that circles are drawn from the center and rectangles are drawn from the top left. So I just want to change the rect mode to center because it's a little bit easier. If I'm trying to put it in the center, then it's easier if it's centered. I don't have to do any math to figure out how far to move it back and up to center it. So I'm going to change the rect mode to center. Another thing that I can do with the rectangle, if I want to get a slightly different shape, is I can actually round the corners. I don't think we've done this yet, but if I put in another argument, and this is also a good way to show that sometimes arguments are not necessary. There's some built-in defaults. So if I don't have a fifth number here, I just get a regular rectangle. But if I put in a fifth number here, I'm going to start with like 20. You can see now I have these rounded edges of the rectangle. That's kind of subtle, so I'm going to go up a little bit more. I'm going to do 40. And so now you can actually see there's, these rounded edges to my rectangle. So that's the optional fifth number here. So now I'm going to take off the stroke. So remember, if I want to get rid of that default outline, I can just say no stroke. And there goes my outline. And now I'm going to add in a color. So for this one, I'm going to do a fill. And we're going to look at a few different ways to do the fill here. So if I wanted to start with something simple, I could just start with a named color. So that's like, probably the place, that's where we started last week. And that's probably where most people would start is with named colors. And part of why we have these is because it matches CSS. So you guys have probably done some CSS in previous classes that you've taken. And CSS has all these names for different colors just to make it a little bit easier to design. You don't have to go look up the RGB table if you just want a simple blue or a simple orange or something like that. And if you click on the link here to all the color names, you can see all of the different names that are available in HTML. So if I want a specific color, let's say I want like a purple color, but I don't want just plain purple. Like this plain purple, it's like maybe it's a little too red or whatever whatever it is that you want to change. You can see the different types of purple. So let's see. I really like this plum color. That's very nice. So I can just use plum here. So let's go back to my sketch. And so I'm just going to type in plum. That's the name of the color. And there we go. Now I have my fill that I want. And so in P5, they've added this thing. This is actually new to like the last year or so. I can click on this color and it shows me all these different options of colors. So there's some defaults that they give you. And you can actually choose this like color palettes. And so there's different types of color palettes. You can actually build your own color palette. But you can also just move this color picker around. And the funny thing here is that it gives you this RGB value because it's creating something that would be useful in HTML and CSS. But we're actually using JavaScript and we're using a library that like understands color values in a different way. So there's another way that we can do this. So let's say I wanted a different color and I go around and I find this RGB color. So what's really going on here is it's just describing the color in terms of numbers rather than in terms of a name. Like we always have names for colors, blue, red, green, etc. But the computer really thinks of colors as a series of numbers which tell it how much different values to put in the different LEDs on the computer screen. It's like very literal. Like each one of your LED, like each pixel on your computer is 3 LEDs. It's a red LED, a green LED, and a blue LED. And each color is created by combining different amounts of those LEDs, those lights. I'm sure you guys have learned this in MMP 100 and probably a bunch of other places. Um, but anyway, so I can move the color around, I can choose different hex values, I can do all this different stuff. But if I actually just take out the CSS part, the string part, and I just leave these numbers, it's still going to have the same color. Because really, I'm allowed to just put in those RGB values directly into my fill. And sometimes that's a little bit simpler. Sometimes it's nice to have the name because you already know what color it is. Here, this fill doesn't. Reading these numbers, I'm not necessarily going to know exactly what color this is. So I would usually put a little comment here that says like this is kind of like a light purple, so that can help me associate the numbers with the colors. So that's another way that I can write color. And this is going to become really useful in the future as we learn more about programming, because the thing that we can do with these numbers that we can't do with a value like blue is we can do math on them. And a lot of like the interactions and animations that we do on a computer come from doing basic math. So for example, if I wanted to animate this color from purple to another color, I could add to these values over time. So I could say like 185 plus 50. And now we get a slightly different color, plus 60, get another color. And so we can actually do math directly on the color. And in a couple of weeks, when we start doing interactivity, we'll start to be able to actually change the colors interactively. I'm going to give you guys a really quick example of that, just so you know what I'm talking about. Instead of having this color here, I'm just going to put in the position of the mouse real quick, which is just mouse X. And we'll go over that in a lot more detail in a couple of weeks. But look what happens now when I move. Oh, whoops, this actually isn't going to work because I don't have I just spent all this time taking this out. Now let's put it back in real quick. I'm kind of jumping ahead, but I just want you guys to see what I'm actually talking about. Okay, so now see when I move the mouse, the color changes. So it's actually interactive now. It's pretty simple. It's really basic. We're going to learn more interesting ways to do it. But that's kind of what we're headed towards in a couple weeks. So anyway, let's go back to our original color. So the main point is that the advantage of having those numbers rather than the HTML names or even the HTML hex values or that big long RGB thing is that I can add, subtract, divide. I can do all these things with these numbers that give me control over the actual colors. So I can do cool animations and stuff. Um, yeah, that's pretty much it. I want to show a couple more things. So I'm going to add a little bit more to my self-portrait. So I'm just going to put a comment right here that says like, this is my head. And then let's put in, what's a good way to show this? Let's put in some like glasses because I think this will be a good way to show this. What I want to show next, which is transparency. So I'm going to draw a couple eyes. So let's do some eyes here. And so for this one, obviously I want to use a circle. And for the fill, I'll start with just like some white. So I'll have some white eyes. And so I'll draw a circle. And I'm just going to copy the X position of the rectangle, the XY position of the rectangle here, and I'll just add to it. So I'll say like 200 plus, let's try 20, and let's do 300. That's the middle. So let's just leave it for now. And for the eye, I'll do it, it's like 20. Okay, that's a little bit too small. So let's try like 50. Okay, that's pretty good. And then let's move this up. So when we're going up in P5, we have to subtract because y starts at 0 and it gets bigger as it goes down. So I'm going to subtract like 50 from this. Okay, that's pretty good. And then I'm going to push this over a little bit more. So I'm going to do plus 50 over here. And that's pretty good. So now I'm going to use a shortcut like I was doing earlier and copy and paste the I and just flip it to the other side. So I just have this line. My cursor is on line 19. I'm going to hit Command C to copy and Command V to paste. And now with my circle, remember this coordinate, this 200 plus 50 represents the I over here. And so if I want an I in the other direction, I'll just do minus 50. So now I have my two eyes. And now what I'll do is I'll put some glasses on this. And actually, I kind of want to put the eyes a little bit farther away. So I'm going to change this to 60 and 60. That looks pretty good. I feel like it could go more, but whatever. I'll just do 80, 80. Okay, that looks a little more balanced. I'm not really like, I don't know why I think that, but anyway. So let's put some glasses on this guy. So first I'm going to put like the glasses rims. And I actually used to wear glasses. I don't really wear them anymore. So this doesn't really look like how I look like now, but it might look like how I looked in the past. But anyway, so I want to put some glasses on here. Uh, so, oh, whoops, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to put two more circles, and let's actually go ahead and just copy this whole thing. And I'll change the fill to black. And then for my circles, I want to make them bigger, so let's make them like twice as big. But it's easy. The thing that's nice about copying and pasting is I didn't have to like figure out the X, Y again. Um, so now I'm just going to take out actually the fill. I'm going to do a stroke here, is black, and no fill. So now there's no fill, so we get those nice, the rims, and then let's increase the stroke a little bit. Stroke weight, let's do like 10. Okay, so now the next part that I'm going to do is use this last little bit, which is the transparency. So, well, actually, let's do the grayscale values real quick, and then we'll do the transparency. So another thing that I'm using here is I just have white and black, and we already looked at how we can do RGB values as just numbers. We can also do that with grayscale numbers. So white is just when all three colors are all the way up. So white is the equivalent of the highest value that you can give a color is 255. So if I do 255 for all three RG and B, that's how I get white. That means all the colors are all the way on, and so it looks white. So I'll put a comment here. 255 is the highest value. Okay. And if they're all the same, that means they're going to be grayscale. And a shortcut for that is just to put one number. So if I just put one number, it's going to apply it to each channel, R, G, and B. And so then I still get white because 255, is the same value for each one. If I make it something less like 200, it's going to be slightly gray or like 150. So you can see it gets darker, but it's still monochrome. It doesn't have a hue because if I'm only using one number, it applies the same to each channel, and so we either get white or black or gray, something in monochrome. So let's turn that back to 255. So fill 255 is a quick way just to get white. And it's a little bit easier because you don't have to like type out white and remember to put in the quotation marks and stuff like that. So then same thing for black, I can just put 0 here. Or if I wanted to have like, dark gray glasses rims, I could put like 50 or something like that. Okay, so maybe that matches, the design a little bit better. Um, and then I have my stroke weight, I have no fill. And then one more thing I can do, remember we had the optional value to make our rectangle rounded. I also have an optional value with my color to add transparency. So I can have 3 RGB values, and then if I add a fourth value, that actually makes it transparent so I can see through it. So we can add the glass to the glasses. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to copy this whole thing and paste it and just change a couple things so I don't have to recreate the X and Y position and the size. I've already got that built in. So this is the glasses frames. This is the glasses lens. And so we don't need the stroke anymore. So I'm going to take out no stroke, or take out the stroke and put no stroke, because this is the insides. And then we don't need the stroke weight, and we don't need no fill. Now let's give the glasses a fill. I'm going to start with like light blue, and I'm going to show the same thing. So if I say light blue, that's what I get, but there's no transparency, and I can't add transparency unless I convert it into numbers. And so the easiest way to do this, now that we have this little color picker, in the past, what I'd have to do if I wanted to get light blue as a RGB, I'd go over to color names, I'd scroll up here, I'd go to blue and look up light blue. Where is it? Right here. And then I would just grab the RGB from there. But now that P5 has this built-in color picker, I can just click on the color And I can just click RGB or hex. Oh yeah, I guess that gives me HSL. That's hex, so it's kind of in the wrong place. For some reason, if I click hex, that gives me RGB. If I click RGB, that gives me HSL. We'll maybe talk about that in another class. And that gives me the hex value. Anyway, what I want is RGB, which is right here. So now I don't even have to remember those numbers. I just get rid of the quotation marks and the extra parentheses. And I say, so I can remember this is light blue. And now here's the cool part that we're leading up to. If I add in another number here, and this again is 0 to 255. So if I say 0 here, they're completely transparent. We don't see that blue glasses at all. If I say 255, now they're completely opaque. We can't see through them. We want something in the middle, so let's try like 100. Okay, now see, I can actually see through the glasses. There's this transparency, and it gives me the ability to create a little bit of this kind of like illusion of the glasses lens. One little thing is you can see the glasses is on top of the frame. So that might make sense for what you're working on, but for me, I want it to be below the frame. So I'm going to copy this whole section. I'm just doing this with the mouse. I'm just selecting this whole section. I'm going to hit Command X to cut, and then move up here, make a couple spaces, just hitting enter a couple times, and hit Command V to paste. And now my lenses are back there. And so now, the transparency is just between the eyeball and like the side of the head or whatever. So it's really just like changing that color ultimately. But if we had more details in here, we would see, the transparency is being applied to those details as well. So I think that is everything I want to cover. So this is light blue. I'm going to say fourth number is transparency here. I'm going to continue with my self-portrait on Wednesday and add a few more things in here. But today I just wanted to focus on those extra color values that we hadn't reached yet. There's more details in here for the values that we haven't covered. You can use hex values as well, just like you would in HTML, but I don't really find that many reasons to use those values now at this point that they have the built-in color picker. You might see a color. Actually, let's say you saw a color that you really liked. Like let's say, I like this color. And I'm not sure what that is, but if I click on it, it shows me the hex value. It does also show me the RGB, but let's say for whatever reason, the color you saw did not have the RGB. I could take this hex value and paste it in. So let's actually put that in our background. So instead of gray, I still need quotation marks for a hex value. So I'll put the quotation marks and then paste in that color that I found. And so that's actually a good use case. If you see a color and you can find the hex value by, looking at the code or something like that, you can paste the hex value in as long as you use the string. So any CSS value has to have quotation marks around it. So hex value as string with quotation marks. So yeah, I think that kind of covers it. We're going to be doing more with color in a couple weeks when we add interactivity, as I mentioned. But yeah, those are the different ways to add in colors. Any questions? Actually, let me stop recording. And I'm gonna finish this project on Wednesday, but since people had questions, I'm just going to go over posting the project again real quick. We still have like 25 minutes, so I think that's okay. But I'm going to stop recording.